Hello everyone, welcome to Rajmulata IAS. Today is 26th April and we are starting with the current affairs for week 4 today. The topic number 1 that we are going to deal with is related with government's debt. Alright, it is related with government's debt financing. Alright, so you know that every government needs money to run itself. Something it earns through its revenues, but some other things it needs to borrow and therefore a debt generate upon the government. तो उसके बारे में आज चर्चा करेंगे हम. Basically, why was it in news? It was in news because there has been a report that Indian government's fiscal deficit Indian government's fiscal deficit is recorded at 15% of the gross domestic product. India's GDP's 15% is the amount of fiscal deficit that is there in India, and this definite deficit must be fulfilled by various mechanisms to meet the expenditures, because certainly the expenditures are more than the revenue. Alright, so there is an act which we have already covered in one of our current affairs class, and that act is known as FRBM Act, that is Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act 2003. This act says that the fiscal deficit should not be more than 6%. Government's fiscal deficit target has been fixed by this act to be 6%, but you know that India's fiscal deficit as of now is 15% instead of 6% of GDP. That means that there is approximately 9% of extra fiscal deficit that we have as of now than what the FRBM Act says. Before going ahead, let us discuss what is fiscal deficit. Let's say what is fiscal deficit. Alright. Now, first and foremost thing is deficit. You know that there are two ways through which you see a kind of change in your money. One is your expenditures, that is spending the money, and second is your revenues, that is earning the money. So deficit occurs when expenditure is more than revenue. Alright, so it's a general definition of deficit. When your expenditure is more than what you earn, you are in a kind of deficit. If you talk about the budget, your budget comprises of government's expenditures as well as government's revenues, and when in budget expenditures are more than revenues, this is called budgetary deficit. Alright, so budgetary deficit is nothing but it is budgetary. So what actually is budgetary deficit? It is nothing but the scenario in which your budgetary expenditures are more than your budgetary revenues. In budgetary revenues, you consist of various things. You include things such as borrowings. Borrowings are actually not a revenue. Borrowings are kind of thing that you have to return. Alright, so all these things are included in the budget. So we define something which is known as fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is defined as budgetary deficit plus all the borrowings that the government has made, that the government has to ultimately return, plus any other liability that is there on the government that it need to pay. Example of borrowing: for example, the government may borrow money from RBI, the government may borrow money from the public by selling the bonds, the government may borrow money from the commercial banks by selling bonds to them. Ultimately, the government has to repurchase the bonds and give back the money. Secondly, liability is in the form कि पहले कभी गवर्नमेंट ने कोई बोरोइंग कर रखी है एंड उसकी जो इंटरेस्ट है, that interest must be paid by the government, and therefore it's a kind of liability on the government. And so we define fiscal deficit as, apart from all the mismatch between the budgetary expenditure and budgetary revenues, you add to the budgetary revenues the borrowings that the government has made from other sources and the liability. That completes the definition of what actually is a fiscal deficit. Now you know that the fiscal deficit is fixed by the FRBM Act to be not more than 6% of GDP, which as of now stands at whopping 15%. Alright? Okay. Now, because there is deficit in the country, the government wants money. The government wants money, and for this, the government is thinking about borrowing through a particular mechanism, and that mechanism is called direct monetizing, or you can say direct monetization. So the next thing that we are going to discuss as part of this topic is direct monetization. So what is direct monetization? So direct monetization is the mechanism through which government borrows money from RBI. Alright, so direct monetization is a mechanism in which the government is borrowing money from the RBI, and what the government is doing, government issue new bonds, and corresponding to the amount of the bonds that have been issued, RBI prints new money. So it may be possible that 1 lakh के bonds government issue करती है और 1 lakh additional money is currency is printed by RBI. RBI give this currency to the government, and the government give these bonds to the RBI, which the government will ultimately repurchase again by paying back to RBI whatever money RBI has taken from whatever money the government has taken from RBI. All right. So by this way, there is by this way RBI's asset and liability are matched. RBI के जो assets होते हैं they are bonds. RBI की जो liability होती है that is currency. Alright, so why we call currency the asset of liability for RBI? क्योंकि अगर आपने नोट देखा होगा तो उसके ऊपर लिखा होता है कि मैं RBI गवर्नर धारक को इतने रुपए देने का वचन अदा करता हूँ. So it's a kind of liability on the RBI to give the holder of that currency worth equal to that money. Alright, and since the government has given the bonds to RBI, which RBI can give back to the government and get its money back, therefore the bonds act as assets and the currency that the RBI publishes act as liability. So they both are matched. Alright, okay. Now we are going to discuss what are the various issues that are there with direct monetization. Alright, so we are going to discuss the issues that are there with direct monetization. Okay, so the first issue is that when RBI prints currency, and when this currency comes to the government spend this currency, that is the government goes for making expenditure. So when the government is spending money, it is spending money in lieu of some products or services it is demanding. So the demand increases, and when the demand increases, it gives increase into inflation. जब भी डिमांड इंक्रीज होती है, इन्फ्लेशन या महंगाई दर भी इंक्रीज हो जाता है. सो द फर्स्ट इशू दैट इज देयर विद direct monetization is that it is going to increase inflation in Indian economy. But this is not where it ends. This inflation is coming at the cost of, along with this, government's debt is also increasing. So गवर्नमेंट का जो कर्ज है वो भी इंक्रीज हो रहा है. क्यों? गवर्नमेंट ने जो नए बॉन्ड्स इशू किए थे, जो गवर्नमेंट ने आरबीआई को दिए हैं, एक टाइम के बाद गवर्नमेंट को बॉन्ड्स वापस खरीदने पड़ेंगे, आरबीआई को उसका पैसा देना पड़ेगा. सो गवर्नमेंट का डेट भी इंक्रीज हो रहा है और गवर्नमेंट का इन्फ्लेशन और कंट्री का इन्फ्लेशन भी इंक्रीज हो रहा है. दिस इज नॉट अ गुड पिक्चर. ऑलराइट, सो द थिंग इज दिस दैट when you go for when the country is experiencing inflation and at the same time the country's debt is increasing, it is showing poor macroeconomic stability. Poor macroeconomic stability. All right. So we are experiencing a condition of poor macroeconomic stability. The second issue is that the second issue with the direct monetization is that government fiscal deficit target may be breached. May be breached. Let's not say fiscal deficit. Government's debt target may be breached. एक्चुअली क्या है कि जो बहुत सारी इंटरनेशनल एजेंसीज हैं, जैसे इंडियन इंटरनेशनल मॉनेटरी फंड, जैसे रेटिंग एजेंसीज हो गई बहुत सारी, गोल्डमैन सैक्स हो गया जैसे रेटिंग एजेंसीज, दे रिकमेंड दैट फॉर अ डेवलपिंग कंट्री, for a developing country, it is recommended that the GDP, it is recommended that that should lie somewhere around 80 to 90% of the GDP. कि बेसिकली आपकी जो GDP है उसका 80 से 90% आपका डेप्थ हो सकता है, लेकिन इन इंडिया already achieved 70% as its depth of GDP. And if we go for direct monetization, we may reach this value of 80 to 90%, which again shows poor macroeconomic conditions in the country. Then further, apart from this, you know that government is, or you can say that the government expenditure, this government expenditure is inefficient, plus there is rampant corruption, and therefore it may result into wasteful expenditure. ये जो नए पैसे जो छपे हैं, जो नया कर्ज गवर्नमेंट ने लिया है, वो भी वेस्टफुल एक्सपेंडिचर में चला जाएगा, जिसकी वजह से देश की जो मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन है, इट इज़ गोइंग फॉर द वर्स. एक्चुअली व्हाट हैज़ बीन सीन इज दैट जो डेप्थ होता है, जो आपका कर्ज होता है, डेप्थ, it must always be spent on creating capital assets, capital assets वो सारी चीज़ें हैं जो आने वाले टाइम में आपको रिटर्न्स देंगी. However, because of this COVID-19 and because of the various issues associated with COVID-19, this debt will be used for expenditure on all those things which does not qualify to be capital assets, and therefore it is going to be wasted, and ultimately this debt has to be paid later in one or the other ways. And it has also been seen other issues is that direct monetization was responsible for balance of payment crisis, in 1991, as well as the poorest financial conditions of the year 2013. Alright, so it is because of these experiences in 1997, Manmohan Singh was the finance minister at that time, and C. Rangarajan, who was the RBI governor at that time, they both decided that RBI will not automatically finance the debt of the government. Alright, so ऑटोमेटिक फाइनेंस की वजह से देश में बहुत महंगाई बढ़ जाती थी, गवर्नमेंट की लाइबिलिटी बढ़ जाती थी. All these things were stopped because of these negative things. Alright, so this is all that was discussed in this particular article that was related with government spending, that the government is facing a fiscal deficit condition of more than 15%, which is above 6% the recommended level. Despite being into serious debt of 70%, the government is increasing its debt by direct monetization, and direct monetization is not free of risk. There are various risks, and these are the 4 risks that we have discussed. Alright, so that was all about this particular topic. Let us now move to the second topic. Second topic is rather a small topic, and particularly it's important for your prelim examination, and it is National Panchayati Raj Divas. National Panchayati Raj Divas or Day, as you want to call it. So this National Panchayati Raj Divas, it is observed on 24th April every year. Every year since 2010. It was in 2010 when it was decided that 24th April every year will be recognized as Panchayati Raj Divas or Day. So it was 24th April 1993. It was 24th April 1993 when 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. It was 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act was passed by the government, making it constitutionally mandatory, making it constitutionally mandatory for the state governments to set up Panchayati Raj, and the panchayats were given the constitutional status. That is why they are very important. Before the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, before this 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, Article 40 of the Constitution, that is the active principles of state policy, it provided for that the government of the state should make efforts to provide for Panchayati Raj in the state or the local government in the state. And another article was Article 246 that provided for or that empowered the states, that empowered the states to legislate with respect to subjects of local government. Alright, so before the 73rd Amendment Act, these were the two very important acts that dealt with the Panchayati Raj, but after 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, the Panchayati Raj was given a constitutional status and a constitutional mandate was imposed upon the states that they have to set up panchayats mandatorily in their state. Now, the first panchayat, it is a prelims fact important to remember. The first panchayat was set up in the country on 2nd October 1959 in Nagaur district of Rajasthan. In Nagaur district of Rajasthan. A very important fact that you must remember, that the first panchayat was organized on 2nd October 1959 in Nagaur district of Rajasthan by the former prime or the first Prime Minister of India, Shri Jawaharlal Nehru. Alright, so that was all about the National Panchayati Raj Divas. Now the third topic we are going to discuss is a historical event, and that historical event is known as Qissa Khwani Bazaar Massacre. Qissa Khwani Bazaar Massacre. In this topic, along with this event, historical event, which is important in India's struggle for independence, we are also going to cover about Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, and his Khudai Khidmat movement, and his Khudai Khidmat movement. These are the three things that we are going to cover in this topic. It is important from Indian history point of view. Alright, so 23rd April 2020 was the 90th anniversary. It was the 90th anniversary of the event that is historically known as Qissa Khwani Bazaar Massacre. What happened that on 23rd April 1930, a protest was organized. A protest was organized at, there's a market which is known as Qissa Khwani Bazaar, which is located in Peshawar, Pakistan, which was at that time part of India's northwest frontier province. So on 23rd April 1930, a protest was organized at Qissa Khwani Bazaar in Peshawar, Pakistan, which is located in northwestern frontier province of that era. And this protest was organized against arrest of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Alright, so let's call KAGK to be the short for Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. So on 23rd April 1930, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was arrested, and against this arrest, a peaceful non-violent protest was organized. So remember, this protest was non-violent. In fact, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, he was the follower of Gandhi, and all his followers were also non-violent. So there was a non-violent protest that was going at the Kissa Khani Bazaar in Peshawar against the arrest of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. The British soldier, they opened fire at this peaceful protest and massacred the people who participated, and therefore this is known as Kissa Khani Bazaar massacre. Alright, so it was the 90th anniversary of this event. So here we learn about the historical figure Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Alright, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Mr. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, he was born in the year 1890 and he died in the year 1988, approximately 98 years of age. He was a Pashtun. He was a Pashtun and a dedicated follower of. He was a Pashtun and a dedicated follower of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi. Alright, so Pashtun is a Muslim ethnic tribe. It is a Muslim ethnic group which is located in western Pakistan and Afghanistan area. It is located in western Pakistan and Afghanistan area. And since he was a follower of Mahatma Gandhi and located in northwestern Frontier province, he was popularly known as the Frontier Gandhi. He was popularly known as the Frontier Gandhi. Alright, so Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan is also popularly known by the name Frontier Gandhi. Alright, okay, so it was actually in 1919 when Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, he met Mahatma Gandhi and joined politics. So it was in 1919 when Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan joined politics after meeting Mahatma Gandhi. In 1920, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan participated he participated in the Khilafat movement. And you know from your history lectures that Khilafat movement was there for Hindu-Muslim unity. So Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was a propagator of Hindu-Muslim unity, and he became the president. He became the president of District Khilafat movement of District Khilafat Committee of Northwestern Frontier Province. Alright, okay. Now, in 1929, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, he founded a movement that is known as the Red Shirt Movement. He founded the Red Shirt Movement among the Pashtuns. He founded the Red Shirt Movement among the Pashtuns. The Red Shirt Movement, these red shirt wearing people, they were known as the Khudai Khidmat Guards. They were popularly known as the Khudai Khidmat Guards, and this movement, the Red Shirt Movement, is basically known as the Khudai Khidmat Guard movement. Alright, in 1987, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, he became the first non-Indian to be awarded the Bharat Ratna. Actually, what happened that in 1947, when partition happened, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was against partition and he wanted to come to India, but Mahatma Gandhi persuaded him that he should not come to India and he should continue his excellent works in the northwestern frontier province in Pakistan, and this northwestern frontier province was also against partition. Alright, so because of his contribution in the India's freedom struggle and his works in the northwestern frontier province, in 1987, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was awarded India's highest civilian award, that is Bharat Ratna. Apart from Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, in 1990, he awarded this Bharat Ratna to Nelson Mandela, who is also not an Indian citizen. Apart from this, remember that in 1980, Bharat Ratna was awarded to Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa. She was a naturalized Indian citizen. She was not Indian by birth. She was naturalized Indian citizen, and the only naturalized Indian citizen to be awarded Bharat Ratna is Mother Teresa. So these are the important points that might be asked from in the prelims examination from Khudai Khidmatgar movement and Bharat Ratna and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Remember this thing, that this Khudai Khidmatgar movement, which was there in the northwestern frontier province, it witnessed participation. It witnessed participation of both males and females. It witnessed participation of both males and females. The males wore bright red color shirts, whereas the women, they wore black clothes. They wore the black clothes. Alright? So this is all about the Khudai Khidmatgar movement and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Let's now proceed to the next topic. Alright, so the next topic, that is topic number 4, we are going to discuss a bit in detail about malaria. Alright, so the topic number 4 is about malaria. So why we are discussing it? Because 25th April every year is recognized as World Malaria Day. So 25th April every year is recognized as World Malaria Day, and this year, that is 2020, the theme was Zero Malaria. Zero Malaria starts with me. Alright, so in a way you can see that the theme as well as the purpose for starting this recognizing the World Malaria Day, it is to create awareness, regarding malaria, as many people lose their life every year to malaria, despite the fact that this malaria, it is curable as well as it is preventable. Alright, so malaria is both curable as well as preventable, and therefore to create awareness about malaria, 25th April is recognized as World Malaria Day. And why we have to remember this particular day for UPSC? Because the World Malaria Day is World Health Organization endorsed disease specific day. क्योंकि ये वर्ल्ड हेल्थ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के द्वारा एंडोर्स किया गया ऐसा दिन है, तो आपको याद रखना है, बिकॉज वर्ल्ड हेल्थ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एंडोर्स डिजीज स्पेसिफिक डे आर 4 in number. The first is World Malaria Day, that is recognized on 25th April every year. The second is World AIDS Day, that is recognized on 1st December every year. The third is World TB Day, that is recognized on 24th March every year. And the fourth is World Hepatitis Day, which is recognized on 28th July every year. ये 4 दिन आपको UPSC एग्ज़ाम के हिसाब से याद रखने पड़ेंगे. So World Health Organization regarding malaria, it publishes a report which is known as World Malaria Report, and the latest report is the World Malaria Report 2019. And in this particular report, the World Health Organization has given an approach to fight the global problem of malaria, and that approach is named as high burden to high impact approach. Alright, so the name of this approach is high burden to high impact approach, and this approach rests upon four pillars. It rests upon four pillars. The first one is political will, political will to reduce malaria. That is, it results into creating awareness among the governments uh, regarding the problem of malaria and what approach they should, what policies they should craft, and all these things. Second, strategic information, strategic information to drive impact. Third is better guidance, then policies and strategies to fight malaria. Alright, and the last one is coordinated national response. Coordinated national response towards malaria by all the countries. Alright, regarding malaria, you should remember that malaria is such a big trouble for the world because annually 212 million people are affected by the problem of malaria. Malaria is indeed life threatening and is caused by a pathogen, and the name of the pathogen is Plasmodium. This pathogen Plasmodium is carried by, yeah, you can say that the vector of this Plasmodium or the carrying agent of this Plasmodium is female Anopheles mosquitoes. Female Anopheles mosquitoes. Alright. Now this Plasmodium, it when the female Anopheles mosquito bite, then this Plasmodium travels through the blood, reach liver, and in liver it multiply rapidly, and when they are sufficient in number, they destroy the red blood cells that are present in the body. They destroy the red blood cells that are present in the body and cause flu-like symptoms. Such as fever plus muscle ache. Alright. The symptoms usually begin in 8 to 30 days. Symptoms usually begin in 8 to 30 days. So that was about topic number 4, that is malaria, because the World Malaria Day was observed recently. Let's go ahead. Alright, so the fifth topic that we are going to discuss, topic number 5, it is known as Operation Twist. Operation Twist. Alright, so Operation Twist is actually an operation of the Reserve Bank of India. Alright, it is an operation of the Reserve Bank of India that was first started in December 2019 and was decided to resume this particular week. It was decided that it will again resume this particular week. So we have to discuss this operation twist of the RBI. So operation twist is nothing but it is a sale and purchase of government securities. It is a sale and purchase of गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज जिनको आप सॉवरेन बॉन्ड्स भी बोलते हैं. ऑलराइट, दिस इज द सेल एंड परचेज ऑफ गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज और सॉवरेन बॉन्ड्स अंडर open market operations, under OMO, which is known as open market operations. So what the RBI does under this operation twist, RBI will purchase long term government securities and RBI will sell short term government securities. Right, and this will result into greater push towards consumption in Indian economy. Alright, so this is going to give a greater push towards consumption in Indian economy. Now you must be like thinking about how RBI's purchasing of long-term government securities and selling of short-term government securities is going to give a greater push towards consumption. So let me explain it to you. Suppose let's say the government has released 100 government securities of long-term duration, say 10 years. Alright, so 1,000 government securities have been launched by the government with the long term, say 10 years, and it is giving a very high rate of interest, say 10% to this particular government security. और हर एक government security की let's say जो कीमत है वो 100 रुपये है. सो 100 रुपये की 1000 government security 10 साल के लिए 10% के हिसाब से गवर्नमेंट ने रिलीज कर दी. Now because 10% is a very good interest rate, the people will be attracted to invest in these kind of government securities, and once the people invest the money, it is saved. It will not be coming into the economy, and it will be people's money is saved. All right, so people will not go for consuming or expending that money. It is a kind of investment by the people. So now what RBI do? RBI goes and says that 900 government securities are purchased by me, that is RBI, and only 100 are left. So now the people, they want to invest in these 100 government securities, so the demand will increase, but the supply is just 100. And you know that when the demand increases and the supply remains constant, the price of this government security will increase. Alright, it's a kind of flexible price, डिमांड के ऊपर डिपेंड करती है. जैसे जैसे डिमांड बढ़ती है उसकी प्राइस बढ़ती जाती है. तो जो पहले 100 रुपये की गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटी थी, अब हो सकता है वो 107 रुपये की बिके. सो 10 साल के पीरियड के बाद वो 107 रुपये से उसको कितना रुपया मिला? 110 रुपया. दैट मीन्स दैट इन अ वे ही जस्ट अर्न 3 रुपीज ऑन दिस 100 रुपी government security that the person purchased because of inflated price at 107. So it's just nearly 3% interest rate and not 10% because the yield is just 3 rupees. By this way, people will be discouraged. So it is going to discourage people to invest in long-term securities, and when they will not be investing in the long-term securities, they have liquid money at their disposal. This liquid money either they will invest in short term government securities, तो शॉर्ट टर्म में जब इन्वेस्ट होगा तो थोड़ी देर बाद वापस से उनके पास पैसा आ जाएगा, अगेन इट विल बी कन्वर्टिंग इनटू लिक्विडिटी, और दे विल गो फॉर consuming this money to create certain assets. They might go for purchasing a house or something. So by this way, this is going to give a push to expenditure. It is going to give a push to expenditure or consumption in Indian economy, and the economy will revive. It will revive. Alright. So this is how this Operation Twist is going to increase liquidity in Indian economy. So this was the Operation Twist that has been decided by the RBI to increase liquidity and consumption in Indian economy by selling the short-term securities and buying the long-term securities under the open market operations. And I think that it is quite clear to you that how this is going to impact the economic rates in the country. All right, so let's move to the next topic then. All right, so let's now begin with topic number 6. The topic number 6, we are going to discuss ethanol production from rice. Ethanol production from surplus rice. Actually, what has happened in India? India has approximately 30.57 million tons of rice. This amount is approximately 128% more than prescribed norms for buffer stock and strategic stock to be maintained with the Food Corporation of India Limited. That means that we have significantly high amount of surplus rice. So India is having high amount of rice which is surplus, and therefore what has happened this particular week, that a decision was taken by the union government. So the union government has allowed conversion of this surplus rice into ethanol, and this ethanol will be consumed for production of hand sanitizers and blending with petrol to achieve the target under the National Biofuel Policy 2018. That will be our 7th topic that we'll be discussing a bit in detail. Alright, so Union government this particular week has allowed conversion of the surplus rice in the stocks with the Food Corporation of India to convert it into ethanol, so that ethanol-based hand sanitizers can be manufactured, as well as blending can take place with petrol to achieve the targets under the National Biofuel Policy 2018. The decision was taken by the National Biofuel Coordination Committee. This decision was taken by the National Biofuel Coordination Committee. Alright, let's go ahead. Okay, so what has happened that the National Biofuel Policy 2018, it allows for production of ethanol. It allows for production of ethanol from food grains which are surplus or not fit for human consumption, and in pursuit of this particular policy, ethanol production from rice is given a green signal. Apart from this, India is underutilizing its grain-based distillery in production of ethanol. India is having approximately 2 billion liters capacity, whereas approximately 38%, that is close to 750 million liters of this capacity is unused, because there is no feedstock is available to make this capacity to be used. Therefore, surplus rice from the 30.57 million tons will be diverted towards the 750 million liters established capacity to produce ethanol so that blending can be made, targets under national biofuel policy can be achieved, and greater ethanol requirement for production of hand sanitizers in this COVID-19 times can be met. However, this move is not free from criticism, and the criticism is coming from the people who advocate that India still has huge number of its population which are malnourished as well as which are hungry. Alright, so the hunger levels in India is approximately as close to Central African Republic. That is, we are we have a huge amount of poverty in the country, and many of the people are hungry and malnourished. And despite this fact, you are diverting the food grains towards fuel. So this particular move of the government is criticized strongly by the people who support for feeding these food grains to the hungry people in the country. Alright, so let's now go to the topic number 7, which is an additional topic, or you can say expansion of this discussion, and is part of the topic number 7. We are going to discuss National Biofuel Policy 2018. So we will be discussing in detail the objectives and the various considerations under the National Biofuel Policy 2018. So the first and the foremost thing, the National Biofuel Policy, it provides financial and fiscal incentives for production of biofuels. Alright, so the companies which are the companies which want to go for production of biofuels, they are given certain financial and fiscal they are given certain financial and fiscal incentives by the government for production of biofuels, and these incentives are in the form of graded form. That is, the government has classified the biofuels into 4 generations, and these financial and fiscal incentives are given on the basis of these 4 generations कि कौन से generation को कौन से benefits देने हैं. It is well classified. So the first is the 1G biofuel, इनको सबसे कम incentives दिए गए हैं. So 1G biofuel are basically known as the basic biofuels and include bioalcohols and biodiesel like entities. Alright, the second is the 2G biofuel, or the second generation biofuel. It consists of examples such as ethanol and biofuel from municipal solid waste. Alright, so if you are manufacturing ethanol from any mechanism, it is a 2G biofuel, and if you are manufacturing biofuel from the municipal solid waste, even that will classify as the 2nd generation or the second generation biofuel. The third generation biofuel consists of butanol. It is another alcohol, but precisely butanol. And the fourth generation biofuel, which is having the maximum incentives associated, it consists of biofuels manufactured from biofuels made from genetically engineered crops. So if you are using genetically engineered crops for manufacturing of biofuels, it will be classified as 4th generation biofuels, and these 4th generation biofuels will have the maximum incentives, fiscal and financial. Apart from this National Biofuel Policy 2018, as discussed in the topic number 6, it allows or it expands scope of materials for production of biofuels. of biofuels. How it has expanded. Sugar-based crops can be used, such as sugarcane juice, sugar beet, sweet sorghum. These crops can be used for production of biofuels. Secondly, starch containing crops such as corn, cassava, they can be used. Potato, not fit for human consumption, it can be used for production of biofuels. And also food grains which are broken, surplus, or not fit for human consumption. Even they can be used for production of ethanol to be blended with petrol to form biofuels. It is to be understood here that the National Biofuel Policy 2018, it has set the target for the year 2030 that India will achieve 20% blending. India will achieve 20% blending of petrol with ethanol and production of 5% biodiesel. Alright, so 5% biodiesel will be produced in the country, and around 20% blending rate of ethanol with petrol will be achieved. By the year 2030. This is the target under the National Biofuel Policy. So let's now move ahead to topic. Alright, so let's start with the eighth topic. And the eighth topic is antiviral nano coatings. Alright, antiviral nano coatings. So why these antiviral nano coatings were in use? You know that because of the coronavirus disease, COVID-19, the usage of triple layer face mask and N95 masks has gone up. However, this coronavirus, it sticks on these masks and remain there for considerable long period of time. So what Department of Science and Technology has done? Department of Science and Technology has allowed or has approved the use of antiviral coatings on the triple layer face mask and the N95 respirator. Alright, and this has been done as part of nano mission, which is actually called Mission on Nanoscience and Technology. Alright, so nano mission or mission on nanoscience and technology, उसके अंदर DST has approved the use of antiviral coatings on triple layered medical mask and N95 respirator. Now this antiviral coating, this antiviral coating is made up of silver, alright, argentinium, that is its scientific representation, is made up of silver, and the type of silver that is used is N9 silver, or you can say N9 blue silver. Alright, so this antiviral coating is made up of N9 blue silver, and this N9 blue silver is actually modified to form nano complexes and so it has been modified to form nanocomplexes with zinc. With zinc, all right. So zinc के साथ nano complexes बनाते हैं by modifying the N9 blue silver, and this N9 blue silver and zinc nano complexes, they have a 99.99% effectiveness against viruses, bacteria, as well as fungi. Alright, so viruses, bacteria, as well as fungi, all are protected by this coating. It has to be understood here that this silver metal, which is having atomic number of 47, this is having high antimicrobial properties. High antimicrobial properties, and this N9 blue silver is nothing but nano size particles of silver capable of providing antimicrobial properties. To conclude this topic, you must remember zinc has atomic number which is represented by Z as 30, and even zinc is having some antimicrobial properties. Alright, so that was about these antiviral coatings that have been developed, that have been approved by Department of Science and Technology to be used on triple layered medical masks and N95 respirators. So as part of topic 9, we are going to discuss about NanoMission. NanoMission was launched by the Government of India in 2007 as part of 11th 5-year plan. So as part of 11th 5-year plan, NanoMission was launched in 2007, and the official name of this NanoMission was Mission on Nanoscience and Technology, that is MNST. This mission is under Department of Science and Technology, as its nodal agency. Alright, so DST, or the Department of Science and Technology, is the nodal agency implementing the Nano Mission. Now this Nano Mission has 5 main objectives. What are these 5 main objectives of Nano Mission? Number 1, basic research promotion. Basic research promotion in nanoscience. So nanoscience में जो basic research है उसको बढ़ावा मिलेगा under this Nano Mission. Second is infrastructure development in the form of laboratories and other machines and capital investment for nanotechnology, and these are to be used for basic research application, basic research promotion, as well as development of application for nanotechnology. So next is applications of nanotechnologies that will be identified as part of the Nano Mission, and consequently the products will be manufactured for these applications. Fourth is human resource development. Human resource development in nanoscience by inculcation of nanotechnology in curriculum of advanced and premier research institutions. And lastly, to promote international collaborations of India with other countries and achieve feat in the field of this nanoscience. So the first phase of Nano Mission that started in the year 2007 ended with the first 5-year plan in 2011-12. The government, considering the success, approved the second phase of Nano Mission during the 12th 5-year plan from 2012 till 2017, and an outlay of 650 crore rupees was given for promotion of nanotechnology in the country. If we talk about the achievements of the Nano Mission, the first and the foremost achievement is we have developed many useful nano products which have been outrolled commercially, such as we have developed nano hydrogel eye drops. We have developed nano filters for filtering out pesticides from drinking water, as well as filtering out fluorides and arsenic, which are both very disturbing pollutants, fluorides and arsenic, from water. We have developed, after that, we also have developed nano silver coating, nano silver antimicrobial coatings for textiles. Alright, antimicrobial coatings for textiles. After that, we recently you have seen that N9 blue silver antimicrobial coating for N95 and triple layered medical mask has been developed. These are some of the important products that have been manufactured under the Nano Mission. Apart from this, we have seen that India has under Nano Mission we have created a platform for global cooperation, in the field of nanoscience, and the name of this platform is National Regulatory Framework Roadmap. National Regulatory Framework Roadmap for nanotechnology. Alright, and lastly, a very important achievement of the Nano Mission, India ranks among top 5 countries in the world in terms of scientific publication, in nanoscience stream. Alright, so this is yet another achievement of the country in nanoscience. Alright, so that was all about the Nano Mission. So I think that these are the 9-10 important topics, or the most probable topics, that I think that are quite important from your examination point of view for the 4th week, that is E4 for April 2020. Signing off, this is Akash. I hope you all remain safe. Keep working hard for achievement of your dreams and success. That's all. Have a great day ahead.